Leading our bulletin this evening, another global study has highlighted the crisis facing the education system in South Africa. Almost 80% of grade 4 pupils in South Africa cannot read for meaning. Basically, they can read but do not comprehend. This is according to the Progress in International Reading Literacy study, which has placed the country last out of 50 countries. This effectively means that 8 out of 10 pupils cannot recall clearly stated information or understand what they read. And to talk more about these shocking statistics, let's go to my colleague Stefanie Jansen van Vieren.
Now let's take a look at some of the grim facts that were pointed out in the Progress International Reading Literacy study. Now, first of all, almost 4 in 5 grade 4 pupils are below the lowest global reading literacy. The next point, the SA is the last in the 50 countries in that study. The next point, their children in remote areas and townships have the lowest reading literacy scores. The next one there, also boys are the worst in the pile of poorly performing grade 4 learners. And then the next one, less than half of the kids tested can read in English and Afrikaans. And then 80% of pupils who learn in another African language cannot read at all. Now we can take a look at some of the possible reasons for this bad performance. A lack of skilled teachers to impart the necessary skills, a lack of adequate learning environment at home. A public education system is beset with corruption, nepotism, and mismanagement, resulting in overall inefficiency. The unions operating in education sector accused of having resisted reforms.
Let's remember that there are a myriad of issues that can cause such results. We now know that, for instance, in terms of neurological developmental disorders, 3 of the neurological development disorder or conduct disorders actually affect boys the highest. I'm talking about ADHD, I'm talking about conduct disorder and oppositional defiant disorder. So these are the behaviors that we find mostly in boys, where matters of taking instructions, following authority are at play. And we know that our condition as the country, absent fathers also contribute to that. But be that as it may, let's not forget where we come from as well, where boys are set and to be sent to go and do herding. It's still happening in certain parts of the country. We know that kids must be in school, but we know that mostly boys are the ones who fall behind.
And that's our big story that we're debating today on ANN7 Prime. How can SA solve its reading woes? Do call us on 011-542-2186 to share your views. Now, on the phone line, we're joined by the Basic Education Department spokesperson, Mr. Elijah Mhlanga. Mr. Mhlanga, a warm welcome to you. Now, what exactly is the take of the department of that survey where at least 78% of grade 4 pupils cannot read with understanding?
Well, as a department, we welcome the report because we paid 24 million to the researchers so that the research can tell us exactly what is happening in the education system, because you need to evaluate what you're doing, where you're going wrong, you fix, where things are positive, you intensify. And some of the points that you've mentioned they sound negative. You didn't get to mention some of the positive developments emerging from that particular report. But I guess as we begin to read the entire report in detail, we'll get to see that it's not all doom and gloom. There are some positive developments that come out of that research.
But if we had to confine ourselves to some of these issues here, many might not want to talk about race, but reading through that report, they went on to illustrate that if we're talking about the academic achievement gap, we're seeing that the white counterparts in grade 4, at least English and Afrikaans speaking, those ones fared a bit well, and then the ones of vernacular did very poorly. So should we involve race there or talk about perhaps some of the obstacles that black children and the families face that would result in some of these results that we saw?
No, it's not race. It's the historical disparities and the inequalities of our country that remain a reality even today, where you have people that are located in rural areas where there are no resources, and other people who are in urban centers where they have resources and are able to access information using a variety of sources of information. but also their exposure to a whole lot of things that are available in the places where they live. That also has an impact on their performance. But also, if you look at the African languages, there's improvement in 5 African languages when you look at the report. So you cannot purely say it's race. It's merely where the schools are located, because even some of the learners that are in the cities, when they were tested in English, for example, they didn't do that well. So it's really about where you are and the reality of the historical inequalities of our country.
So you're saying let's exclude race, but rather to say that learning outcomes in historically disadvantaged areas are generally low.
Yeah, they're generally low, they're historically low. That's why, as well as the department, we've gone further to establish a unit at the Department of Basic Education called the Rural Education, because there are specific challenges there that are peculiar to that environment that you cannot find in urban centers. That's why we feel there has to be a specific intervention aimed at equalizing the environment to make sure that we bridge the gap between urban and rural, because those learners that are in rural areas are disadvantaged, and we cannot allow a situation where it remains as such. That's why even when we launched the Read to Lead campaign in 2015, which was aimed at improving our reading rate in South Africa, we targeted schools in rural areas which do not have libraries. So there are already interventions that we put in place, because what this report has told us is not necessarily new. The annual national assessment had already told us. So what we needed to do now was to look at how we do compared to countries from the continent and others from outside Africa.
Perhaps if you could just stay on the line for us. We're now joined on the phone line by Brian from Katlehong. Brian, your take on today's conversation.
Oh, okay, yes, ma'am. I want to agree with the report that most of our learners, they cannot read. Actually, personally myself, I'm also a teacher. This is what we experience. I'm actually involved with teaching adults. Most of the adults who come to our schools, they lack reading skills and counting skills. And personally, I don't want to say I would put blame especially to mainstream schools. You understand? Mainstream schools also, they are still struggling. Educators are still struggling. Solely blame must be put on the Department of Education. Department of Education must make sure that especially educators that were employed during apartheid time must be retrained, so that all the children that they come under them, they are properly educated. When they come to maybe when they go to university or high school, they are able to read and write. Most of our students, ma'am, they can't read, they cannot even write. But you find that a student has completed grade 10 or a student is doing grade 11, but the student can't read, can't write. I supported that report.
No, it's certainly very disturbing, because we do know that reading is the key to your academic success and just future in general. Mr. Mhlanga, your take there, that caller saying that the blame should be put squarely on the department's lap?
No, not really. This is not a type of issue which you can place blame on the department only, because we feel that parents as well. I think one thing that you should also have said as a teacher is that, you know, when parents are invited to school to discuss the performance of their children, they do not attend those meetings. And that means the teacher is left on his own or on her own to deal with the challenges that learner is facing. Our parents at home, they are not reading to their children, and children are not supported or even challenged to read a book.
But Mr. Mhlanga there, apologies just to interrupt you there. If we're talking about our parents not reading to children at home, we cannot divorce ourselves from the reality that some of the parents are illiterate. If we've gone to multiracial schools, I cannot say my grandmother can read. So what are we saying if we find that in some black communities or households, the parents cannot read themselves? So that means those children will fare poorly in school?
Not really. When I say reading, I don't mean reading in English. I mean reading even in your own language. Most people can read their own languages. If you cannot read yourself, you need to at least ask the child to read to you, so that you are seen to be supporting that child. So it doesn't mean that if you're illiterate, you have no role. You actually have a role. That's why we even created the workbooks, which were created specifically for parents and their children to use at home as part of the learning experience. We made them as simple as possible. They're pictures, they're interactive. They enable the parent, even the one who cannot read, to be able to see what is written on the book. So you still have a role to support your child or your grandchild. If you are a guardian, you also have a responsibility to make sure that you go to school, talk to the school principal or the school teacher who will tell you what challenges that learner is facing. So this is something that everyone must do. If each and every person were to play their role, at home you read, at school they are taught how to read, and we challenge this, we form book clubs, we talk about this every day, we would see a change taking place. So the teachers as well must go to school, make sure that they spend time in class doing their work, but also SGBs and members of the community must go to the schools and monitor if indeed learning and teaching is taking place. The department needs to make sure that the necessary funding, resources are put in place for learning and teaching to happen effectively. So everyone must really play their role here. We cannot blame one or the other.
We have Madume in Krugersdorp. Madume, your take? Elijah Mhlanga is saying that teaching is the responsibility of educators and parents alike.
Thank you for this opportunity. I think it's an early panic. I think for me, it's normal for small kids from rural areas especially, to struggle like that. I think the other point that I want to make here is that for me, the main focus should be on the matriculants. We should be worried more about the matriculants than the small kids. I grew up in a rural area myself. I remember back in the year 1989, I was doing standard 2, and I couldn't read. But today, I'm proud to say I wrote my examination, postgraduate diploma examination. I did well. I'm looking forward to doing my master's. I don't have a problem anymore.
Wonderful.
I think it's normal for small kids to struggle, especially from the rural areas.
No, congratulations to you, Madume. No, certainly very commendable. We now have Natalie from Woodmead. Natalie, your take on today's conversation.
Yes.
Natalie, we seem to have lost you there. You can go.
My take is that we lack parental support. We lack parental support. I'm also a teacher in the township. And what I notice is the fact that parents are not involved. The battle is being fought by teachers only.
But Natalie, talk to us about the circumstances in these very communities, because some then go on to argue that some of these parents are either domestic workers, they work very awkward hours, they cannot assist the children when they come home, they just have to provide something for these kids to eat.
Yes, it's true, but they can make arrangements. We have parents that have children in Model C schools who are domestic workers, but are able to make arrangements for their children to be supported. So, with us in the township, the parents think that education belongs to the classroom only. We don't have sufficient support from parents. They only come to the school to fight or accuse teachers, When you call them regarding the child's work, you can't get them. It's very difficult in the township.
No, we hear you. Thank you very much for your input, Natalie. Thank you very much. Now on to our next caller, Griffiths in Mpumalanga. Griffiths, your take on our debate this evening?
Thank you very much. With me, when it comes to reading, what I've realized is that the system itself, it's just not allowing learners to learn. For example, initially, when we learn about reading, it was about knowing the sounds of all the alphabets, and also knowing how to read, to recite those vowels from foundation phase. And secondly, the learning areas that are being introduced need to be in line with the reading. In most cases, when we teach learners, we should always be focused on reading. I can give you a very good example. In some years back, the home language had more periods than the content subject. And when you look at the content subject, at the home language, it was more reading than any other thing. Learners were able to read, were able to write in their home language. In fact, when we talk about the home language, everything was done in home language. So that forms the basic of reading. So if you can check now the results of our own home language, learners are not performing very well. So you cannot read the other language. Meanwhile, you fail to read your own language. So I'm thinking the department, we must let me go to the intermediate phase. Intermediate phase, when you look at the subjects that are there, they don't influence learners to read. To me, I believe in intermediate phase from grade 4, we need to take out those content subjects and put a lot of pressures on reading in the home language and first additional language, so as to prepare them to go to grade 5, because grade 5 and grade 6, it's more reading even in the content subject. That's my intake. I think if we can do that, we don't introduce these learning areas at once. We introduce them phase by phase, so that they can learn how to read. For example, in the grade 4, to me, I think a grade 4 child can learn only 4 or 5 subjects. That's all, or 4 subjects, so that we can emphasize more on reading. And in grade 5, we introduce the other one, grade 6, then he or she will be learning the complete 6 learning areas. So you will see they will improve in reading, in reading, because reading is the key of everything.
No, thank you very much, Griffiths in Mpumalanga. Elijah, your take, these callers, one actually went on to talk about supporting teachers themselves, that perhaps they need to be retrained. What is the department's position on that?
No, that's correct. That's why we have a set of interventions to support our teachers on the job. We have brought in partners to help us do that, because even our universities have acknowledged that the curriculum that they have is not adequate. It doesn't prepare our teachers with the necessary skills they need, particularly when it comes to skills in terms of teaching kids how to read, because that's a specific skill that a teacher at foundation phase would need to have for him or her to be able to teach the kids. So that is something that we are looking at together with the Department of Higher Education and Training. But ourselves as basic education, we also have in-service training for teachers to improve their teaching skills in that regard. It's an important priority in the activities of the department.
And then what about ECDs? Because you keep talking about the foundation. We all believe we should be prioritizing the foundation of the child. What about ECDs? Are we seeing more monitoring in that respect, or in that area, where we're no longer seeing Lama Creche, where perhaps some of these teachers have not been empowered and young kids just go there to either play the whole day and sleep, and they don't get the necessary foundation?
You're correct. The government commissioned a study to establish what exactly is happening at ECD level. The Department of Performance Monitoring and Evaluation actually commissioned that study, which was released. It did find that we needed to strengthen 2 things there: the curriculum, so that there's uniformity in terms of ECD's teaching, but also the minimum qualifications for educators at that level. And all of that work is being done, because we know that that's a critical phase in the life of a person to acquire skills for them to be able to cope in their schooling years. So we are looking at that as well, and I'm sure progress will be announced as soon as the the reports are ready.
But Elijah, not to create a problem while solving another here, because some would then go on to say that perhaps we are calling for you to take food from some others' mouths where they've got these little creches where they're teaching and they're also providing an income for their own families. So would you be looking at empowering those very people, not saying if you don't have the qualification, we're closing down your creche?
No, we're not going to do that. We are going to say, if you already have an establishment, what are the norms and standards that you need to comply with? If we are going to have teachers, make sure that your teachers have the minimum qualifications that will enable them to teach the uniform curriculum that has been approved for that level. So it's not really about closing people down. It's about urging people to comply with the minimum norms and standards.
And then just in closing, perhaps to take you back to that dismissal of the complex web of perhaps obstacles that assault black families and students daily, you still say we cannot at this point still be blaming poverty or apartheid to say that some of our children as black communities cannot read because ourselves we cannot read, or most of us are working long hours and our bosses can attend school meetings and we cannot.
Yeah, you're right. Those are the realities of South Africa. You know, we need to also acknowledge that some of them do not have parents or guardians, so they are on their own. When they leave school, go home, there's no parent, there's no adult waiting for them at home. So that person, what do you expect from them? It means they depend on neighbors to support them, or they depend on relatives who might not even be living with them, you know, for support. So the teacher becomes the most important person in their life. And we feel that where that type of social support is needed, it needs to be given. But overall, we are saying, as a nation, we need to get to the habit of prioritizing all issues regarding education. This debate should not end now. We need to continue it so that education stays on top of mind in South Africa. Whether you are poor or rich, you need to understand that if you are poor, you need to support your child, because education is the only way of getting out of poverty if learners are able to be supported right through their schooling career.
Now, certainly a great point. Beverly from East Rand, your take on our conversation this evening.
Good evening.
Good evening to you, ma'am. You can go ahead.
Good evening. Yes, this is Desiree. I just want to comment on what Mhlanga said. It's so very important for us as parents to get involved for our kids. You know what? I've got a 9-year-old boy, which is a very troublesome boy. And I just took the liberty myself as a parent to call his teacher just to find out what is going on. Is my child doing well? Is there any problems? And that's when I found out that my child is not doing well at school. I took it upon myself. I'm a working mom. I work during the day. I come very tired at home, but I took it upon myself as a mom, because their child is in this world because of me. I took it upon myself to sit with my child every day, and I could see the improvement. And the teacher even took it upon herself after what I did to give me feedback, regular feedback on my child's performance. So I think us as parents, no matter what the situation is at home, we need to take responsibility of our children's future. The teachers are there during the day to protect our children, but we need to make sure at night that our children, you know, is doing what they are supposed to do. Because I remember in the beginning of the year when I went to fetch my daughter that is in grade 11, when I went and fetched her report, she was the only person the only pupil in the classroom that passed. So we had a meeting, and the teacher was mentioning to us as parents.
Unfortunately, Desiree, we have run out of time, but a very powerful point that you make there, that as parents we do need to take the responsibility and inquire after our children's academic progress. And for those of you that know of child-headed households, it's also our responsibility to go to the neighbor's household and try and teach those children, if you can, in fact, read yourself. It's just one Saturday, help them read. Mr. Mhlanga, thank you very much for joining us as well.